Bonjour. Hello, my name is Crystal Harrison Collin. I am the Community Engagement Librarian at the Silicate Public Library. I remember thinking back, like, what am I going to be and all these things. One of the earliest experiences of being in a library was our elementary school library. I thought about those times, and I remember our librarian, Miss Roloff. She was a really, really good storyteller, and that's what, like, just her presence and the way she presented stories. It just drew me in immediately, because I loved stories from age 3. My mom read to me when I was just a baby, so I mean, that was important when growing up, was reading. I was an avid reader throughout elementary. So when graduation came along, our grade 8 grad, the younger grades made poems about the graduating class. And one of the lines in my poem, it read, "A writer or librarian she will be." So I guess in a sense, I did imagine myself working in a library or maybe a bookstore. And I've always been surrounded by books. I attended Wabigoon Public School from kindergarten through grade 8. And the best day of the week was when our class would visit the library. Our librarian was awesome. She would give us library lessons. She'd show us how to use the card catalog. And back then, they were the old cards where you'd have to sign and date. She'd explain the Dewey Decimal System. And as a child, I recall never ever getting it. But I just knew where my favorite books were by memory and curiosity. I was one of the first of my class to venture to the nonfiction section. We used to think that they were for the big kids. And I was drawn to the books on space and astronomy. So yeah, I did imagine myself working in a library. I was hired as a circulation clerk in 2007 at the Silicate Public Library. And since that time, I was employed at the public library either as a part-time or casual circulation clerk. And experience in working in those roles further developed my interest in higher education and my career choice as a library technician. And being around the staff that I worked with when I first was hired, it was inspiring. They taught me a lot, and not just about the library, but things in my own life. And it just, like I said, it just further developed in my interest in wanting to learn more about libraries and higher education. And that's how it started. I'd often get distracted from my studies and just grabbing a book that was of interest, and I'd sit there and be like, "Oh wow, oh yeah, oh," and then I'd go get something else and be like, "Oh yeah, this is cool," like, yeah, and then I would be distracted from my studies. And that one's a hard one, because there's so many books that I like to go back to. But the one that sticks out, I'd have to say, would be Embers, one Ojibwe's Meditations by Richard Wagamese. The reason being is that, his words are healing, they're inspiring, and they help me personally in my life journey. And I just love it. I love his words. And that's the book that I always go back to. It's like a daily meditation for me. Right now I'm reading For Joshua, and that one is it's sad, but I mean it's really good so far. The Reason You Walk, a memoir by Wab Ginyu. Growing up, I didn't have my father in my life. He's a residential school survivor. But growing up, I didn't know that. My mom, I guess, sheltered me from that trauma, from that historical pain as much as she could. And we weren't taught these things in school. When I started healing, when I decided to journey on my healing path, I had to take a look at my relationship with my father and find out why he was absent. And as I read more about residential schools and then I found that book, and then I realized Wab Ginyu is my cousin. I didn't know that. When I started reading into the book, and I was getting familiar with some of the names in there, or I read some of the names in there, and I'm like, this person sounds familiar. So I remember texting my sister and asking her. My sister is from my dad's side, and we were always curious on either side, like I wanted to get to know her and she wanted to get to know me, kind of deal. And we kind of developed that throughout my teen years. But anyway, I texted her and I asked her, who is Fred Kelly and who are these people? Or she's like, oh, that's your uncle. I'm like, oh, really? She's like, yeah, Wob's our cousin. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. And well, now I know. And his story, it really affected me, and it really opened up my eyes to my dad's story, and it gave me an understanding. And there was forgiveness. There was a lot of discussion between my father and I. And I just had to tell him that I know. And he knew what I was talking about. He knew that I meant residential school. And he just broke down. I broke down. And in that moment, there was healing. So I'd have to say that book really helped me understand my father and where he was coming from and what happened. And when we spent some time together last summer, we stayed up late and we were talking about just everything. And he was telling me stories, and we went to a powwow together. And there was this moment where I was dancing in the circle. I'm a jingle dress dancer, and I'm dancing, and I was praying, and I was being grateful. I was thanking Creator for that moment, for reconnecting, with my father, and having my sisters and my relatives, my nieces and nephews, my family, my granddaughter. We were all together, and it was beautiful. I was praying, and in that moment, I just happened to turn to my left, and my father came dancing right into the circle, and he joined me. And I was silently crying to myself, like, oh, wow, just miigwech. And he looked over at me, and he was just smiling. and I was smiling. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful moment. And yeah, it was a very powerful moment. And like I said, that book changed everything for me. As sad as it was, as painful as it was reading it, I feel that I needed to feel all of it. And today, my father and I are strongly connected. We're always talking. So there's no, we're not absent anymore. We're just, yeah, we've made it full circle. Yeah, it's definitely changed since my time being in the library, from being super strict and quiet, not disturbing anybody. Today, where patrons are, more, I guess, more loud and not so strict. Like today's librarians, we're not, we're not that traditional anymore. I feel it should be filled with people and a safe haven, a good community hub, somewhere that's friendly, inviting, accepting of everybody. I learned a lot from Wendy McDonald. Um, so much. She was a really good mentor while I was working at the library as a part-time circulation clerk. Learned quite a bit from her. I do like to write. I do a lot of writing. I also like to travel. I haven't been outside Canada though. I like to do readings online. One of the things that I've been doing, or that I have done during quarantine, was read pages from Richard Wagamese, The Embers. And I found that my circle of friends really appreciated it, and they looked forward to it. So I just kind of kept it up. And then my teenagers, uh, mainly my teenage daughter, she introduced me to that TikTok app. I've been doing TikTok videos just for fun, and yeah, I didn't think that I enjoyed or would enjoy, uh, I guess, being online like that, like out there. But I don't know. I just got comfortable with it, and it's just been fun. Those are some of the things I do. I'm also some people don't know that I'm a mom of 5. I have 2 adult children. Well, not children, but my children. And I have a granddaughter. She's 1 year old. Son-in-law. So yeah, that's something about me. I'm happily married, partake in our cultural ceremonies around here. I like powwows, jingle dress dancing, higher education, and not just Western, but I also enjoy Indigenous knowledge, like learning from my elders. It's something that I really enjoy doing. I'm just trying to think what else might be interesting. Cats.
Yeah.
People say I'm silly with my cats. No,
Yeah.
I've always been a cat person. We do have we have a mixed husky as well. She's hilarious. Like, she's basically an overgrown cat. Like,
Mhm.
it's weird, but I guess I have a silly sense of humor, I guess. Yeah. Anishinaabe, we We weren't a written history. We were spoken. A lot of our stories were spoken and shared generation to generation. And I remember, when my mom would share stories that her father shared with her. And those were my favorite. I would sit there and I would just listen, and she'd go on and on and on. And I do that too with my kids. I'll sit there and tell a story. And it was funny when we were out at a powwow. We were out at Eagle Lake Powwow one year, and there was my family and there was another family, and we're all like, oh yeah, blah blah, and hey mom, why don't you tell a story? I'm like, kind of story? I don't know, just tell us a story. So I'm like, oh, okay, what could I tell you? So I went on, and they just enjoyed it. Oh yeah, that was a good one. Do you have another one? We're like, nah, it's getting late, it's time to go to bed. Yeah, those are my favorite, are verbal stories and just by memory. And I often like sitting around with people and just sharing stories and just engaging in that conversation of stories. I believe everyone has a story and they deserve to be told. What might surprise people, or I've been writing a lot about my own life journey, and one day I hopefully will have enough for my own memoir. I had my daughter record me like reading some of what I've written, but I haven't gotten enough courage, I guess, to share my own story. And I hope that one day that I'll be able to share my own story and do like a recording or a reading of my own work. I think Harriet, the story of Harriet Tubman and her escape from slavery. I think that was a very powerful story. She was a very powerful woman. And I think that one is a must watch DVD. I think people should watch that one. I really enjoy nonfiction books. That's my preference. But I wanted to get into a fiction book with my younger son, just to keep our imagination going and active. And so I brought out the Marrow Thieves, Sherry Demeline. Yeah, I wanted to read that. Story is absolutely amazing. My son and I would have discussions about what we've read and what we liked about it, and I think that was a good experience. We've yet to finish it though, but we're enjoying it. I also, well, growing up, I really enjoyed Anne Rice. I loved her stories. They're really well thought out. I mean, I just, so much research, and it was just amazing, that aspect of her writing. It's brilliant, really. And my favorite story from her was Pandora. I don't know why. I really love that story. That vampire. When I was young, I was about 9 years old, and my mom had a collection of books on her bookshelf, on her bedside or whatever. And she told me, she was like, yeah, I remember like delving into them. I'm like, ooh, and looking at the covers and thinking like, oh, that one looks scary. That one looks really cool. She's like, not for you. You're too young yet. Your little mind can't grasp those concepts yet. So I'd like for you to wait until you're about a teenager to read those. So the little mischievous thing that I was, I would sneak in, and the first book that I kind of stole from her was Firestarter by Stephen King. The reason being, well, the cover was of Drew Barrymore, and her hair was out like this, and there was fire behind her, and I'm like, oh, that looks cool. I recognized her from E.T. So I was like, that can't be that scary. So I snuck it into my room, and I was reading. I read the entire book, and the part where her father was murdered, I was crying. I was crying on that part, and comes in. She's like, "What are you crying about?" Nothing. She's like, "What do you have there?" Nothing. She's like, "Let me see." Pulls out that book. She's, "I told you." There was one also, Gina Gallo. I read her memoir of being a police officer, a woman in Chicago. That one was a brutal one, but also very powerful. And that one jumped out at me, and definitely worth remembering. But nowadays, I don't know, it's weird because I kind of made it like a full circle back to like my roots of being 80s and all that stuff. I don't know, I love the 80s. It's like hearing a really old song, but it's like it's all new to me again. It's like, yeah, that's my jam. I see. I introduced. I don't know. It's like my daughter mentioned to me last night, Lily. She says, you know that song, and she names it. She says, "Feel it in my bones." It makes me feel sad, or not sad, but that feeling when it brings back a lot of memories. I just remember when I was younger. I loved that song so much. Happy memories and just being a kid. And sometimes I can't listen to certain songs because it makes me feel too emotional. I think I have a huge emotional connection when it comes to music. It holds a lot for me, more than a journal. And I said, wow, yeah, you know what? I feel the same way. Like, whenever I hear a song or, you know, something, it brings a story. It always brings a story. And, you know, one of the things what I'm doing when I'm writing is I'm listening to a song of some sort. And, you know, the song, I'm on Fire by Bruce Springsteen. I listened to that song on repeat when I wrote the story of my mother, of when I was grieving, and I wrote it. I mean, I kept that song on repeat, and I just listened to it over and over and over. I'd play it back, and it would just keep that thought going, and I would have to finish that thought, or I'd have to finish that paragraph or that story until it was done, and that song would just be on constantly. I wrote one little story to what is it, Dire Straits. It was one of my early memories, and I wrote that. It was kind of sad, but I just kept that song on repeat. Sultans of Swing. And that I didn't even intend on writing that morning. I was just listening to my old music, and I was making breakfast, and then it just dawned, like I'm like, oh yeah, that memory. I'm like, I gotta write that down. And then it just turned into a little story. So I'm like, oh. So yeah, it's random for me. Like whenever I get to writing, it just I don't know. I don't have to like necessarily be in a mood to write. Like it'll just come to me. And I'll be like, oh, okay, I gotta get that down. My mom read to me when I was just a baby, so that was important when growing up, was reading. So yeah, I did imagine myself working in a library.